Welcome to Predictable Revenue Radio, hosted by Patrick Morrissey, Chief Marketing Officer at Altify, the sales transformation company. At Predictable Revenue Radio, we believe the only way to unlock sustained growth is to deliver predictable revenue by delivering insights, thought leadership, and best practices on how to improve sales velocity. So sit back, all that and more is coming your way as we turn it over to our host, Patrick. Hey, Patrick.
What are the pressing issues that sales leaders and revenue professionals are focused on? Oftentimes, those get very specific very quickly. And so what we have today is an opportunity to zoom out a little bit and have more of a market perspective and a global perspective on the art of selling and how do you drive predictable revenue and how do you drive sustained growth. And I'm pleased to welcome our friend and colleague here from Aragon Research, Jim Lundy. Jim's a expert in this field and can talk to the problem in multiple dimensions. So, Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Patrick, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
And thanks for your time. Give us a little bit of perspective on Aragon and where you focused your time and attention, Jim.
I founded Aragon about 7.5 years ago. We focus on what we would call digital work and also digital platforms. So how do people get work done, and what are the new ways of companies with back-end systems to support these new ways of work? I mean, the big bottom line is people want faster outcomes, and they want to leverage technology and process and people to get to those faster outcomes. And it's a race to become a digital enterprise. And that's really some of the things at a high level that we talk to clients about.
And give the listeners a little bit of background on you and your bio and your background. How do you come to this party?
So a lot of people know me because I've been an industry analyst for a long time, 7.5 years here at Aragon. I was at Gartner for 12 years as a managing vice president. But before that, before I went into the analyst ranks, I did a lot of the business jobs that now have become quite popular relative to outcomes, which is sales and marketing. So I spent 15 years at Xerox, did about every sales job there is, carried a bag, was a district manager, region manager, national sales operations manager, which would now probably be called sales enablement. But really understand everything there is relative to selling and kind of having lived that and done fairly well. And then kind of got into the marketing and product and, that whole side of things. So kind of, look at the thing from a different vantage point than maybe some others that talk about sales and sales enablement but have never done it.
Well, exactly. It's one thing to talk about sales. It's another thing to have carried a quota, much less managed a team. So you've probably got plenty of war stories and a few scars to reflect on. But, that's great context to think about the world. And you touched on it a second ago in terms of both outcomes, but as well as the digital world of work that we all live in. Give me a little context for what's going on in the marketplace and maybe juxtapose that with your own, personal experience about what happened when you entered the sales world and what the reality is that we're all faced with today.
The thing I would probably say is, there is definitely a shift going on in selling. You need better equipment and better tools. And since I was a soccer coach for 10 years, I kind of look at it as if you're not doing digital selling, and we'll talk about some of the techniques and some of the ways to do that, I think, throughout this podcast, then you're not really equipping your team the right way. And really the other thing I would probably say, so there's that side of it, but there's also the process side. We talk to a lot of firms, and sometimes at the executive level, CEO, COO, and they're not growing. We start to sometimes just ask them questions like, for example, do you have a CRM? Do you use it? What kind of activity model do you have? What kind of methodology do you have? And sometimes you get blank stares or you get a slow response. Even though there's more tech today, there's still this thing about getting out there and making the calls, whether it's on the phone, on video, face-to-face, however you do it. But that model has not changed, and that's kind of old school. But I would just say that, one of the things I've seen today a lot of times is people think that I have my outbound team making 150 calls a day. But, my question is, well, how many appointments are you doing a week per territory? And then they look at you like, oh, you mean it's really about that, not just the number of calls you make? I said, yeah, it's really about appointments and meetings. So I think, there's still a lot of fundamentals. One way to look at it is we've transformed a lot of different things in the enterprise. That's a lot of top of mind. A lot of times sales is kind of like beaten down relative to they didn't make their number. But a lot of times when people are doing a great job, there's not a lot of recognition. I kind of got dragged into this, Patrick, by probably like 15 to 20 different client executives at Aragon clients about 5 years ago called me up and said, hey, this other firm's not doing a good job of covering this space. We know you were in it. We know you know it. Would you please cover more of this sales enablement space?
And sales enablement's big, and I want to come back to that, but I want to rewind to something you said and take it apart a little bit, because you talked about talking to clients and talking to senior executives who either don't have a CRM, or maybe they have a CRM and they're not using it. Certainly they're not using it with aggression. And it begs the question, what's that market look like? Because there's certainly a school of thought, which was back in the day, the heydays, it was Siebel. And everybody's now migrated to Salesforce, and there's not much of interest in CRM. That's just table stakes. And what you're suggesting is something quite different here.
I mean, and I also a general manager at a software company for about a year and a half after leaving Gartner and before starting Aragon. So I lived in Salesforce 24 hours a day. I've had a big number to make. So you kind of learned the new way, and really the only way that you can manage it. And, but I think the thing is top of mind. Chief revenue officers know that you got to use your CRM. Sales managers know it, and reps certainly know that that's expected of them. It's just kind of eye-opening when sometimes the executives don't really get it, what's really going on, and what value does it provide? Because the role of CRM has changed a lot, but we're still surprised. I was talking with a startup in Europe today, very, very early in the morning, and they've made some big investments, trying to enter markets. And I started asking questions. I said, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? This was the CEO of the company. Young company. What are you using for CRM? I mean, this is today.
Right.
Yeah, and I didn't get a strong answer. I said, so that's first, job number one is you're paying for all this inbound lead gen. You're getting tons of leads. You're not tracking the leads. And by the way, I mean, even for the sales manager out there listening to this, a rep can only track 7 things at one time, right? It can only track 7 things. By the way, if it's not in the CRM, it doesn't exist.
Right.
I think that's one of the things, blocking and tackling. You've got financial systems to measure everything, but the value of the CRM application is not to track the reps, it's to track your revenue and to understand what's going on with that. And we'll talk more about making it more predictable. But I think that's just one of the things when you actually look at it, people, sometimes people, oh yeah, we got that. But are they really using it? And is there wisdom in how they use it? And what are the best practices? And I think that's one of the things where it's kind of like, it's a checklist. Like, we have it. Okay, next question. But I think there's a lot more to the art and science of running sales organizations and using the tools. And CRM is the foundation tool. It's not the only tool. And that's why when you talk about digital selling, as we're going to talk about, there's many other things that go into that equation rather than just, entering the opportunity to track.
100%. And that's exactly where I want to go, is picking up that thread on digital selling, because there's a distinction to be made between we all live in a digital world and we're digital people and digital consumers versus you are really prosecuting in a digital fashion a great relationship and building the sort of behaviors that drive revenue, particularly in a sophisticated B2B context. What's that look like from your chair?
The broader term that's been used in the market is sales enablement. And, again, having done national sales ops at a multi-billion-dollar company, that was kind of broad. And, back in the day, it was portals, and now that's graduated to more specific tools that allow you to reach out with either phone or email or messaging, do content analytics. So we kind of call it sales engagement platforms. If you look in any of the app stores, whether it's Dynamics or, Salesforce App Exchange, there's thousands of applications that plug into a CRM to bring value-added enablement to a sales team. And so the beauty is that a lot of teams can say, we want to use these 5 applications inside of our CRM to, make our teams more digital. So it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but I think the thing I would say, you look at office productivity suites like Microsoft or Google, we've kind of discovered, we call those kind of digital work hubs. And with these sales engagement platforms that have emerged, they're kind of like a digital work hub for sales teams that provide more insight. Obviously, other things like automatically updating some of the records in Salesforce and things like that. And that's really one of the things we say is, it's like an office for sales, but it's not a horizontal thing like Google or Microsoft. So that market's emerged, growing really fast. And still today, when we talk to people about, hey, how are you equipping your sales teams? They say, well, we have CRM. The interesting thing relative to the market is that for like digital selling, a lot of teams today are not doing digital selling. They're still doing data sheet, they're doing email,
Right.
A lot of just straight outreach. They don't have these new tools that allow teams to be much, much more productive, and also to have the insight to know whether they should even be following up with that prospect.
100%. And that actually, stepping away from tools, because thinking about this, what are the strategic inputs or the questions I should be asking as a CRO? Because I was with a CRO a few weeks ago, and he just said, hey, look, there's only so many times that I can go back to my CFO and try to explain why we're buying one more thing to make up for the limitations in our CRM. And it kind of touches on a couple points. CRMs are, table stakes are good at basic stuff, but there's a lot of these next gen digital capabilities that a lot of them don't have. But maybe more importantly, from a prioritization for the CRO, what should she be thinking about? And how would you advise? I've got a big sales target again this year. I've got a lot of tools. I got a lot of moving parts, but what are the things that are really going to move the needle, and how do I prioritize those?
That's a great question. We're seeing more calls from CROs and sales VPs of sales enablement where they're saying, hey, we know you talked to us 2 years ago about this category. It looks like the category's taken off. What should we do? When you look at what are the day-to-day tools the sales team is using, and again, we've written reports about, this market and have evaluations of some of the players. That would be one of the things I would say is like, well, what do they use on their daily workday besides CRM to communicate and collaborate and interact with prospects and customers? That becomes one of the things to say you should really have a platform that does that. And obviously we'll talk about how they sell, obviously a little bit later, but basically you sent them an email. Did they open the email? You called them, did they call you back? Or did they listen to your voicemail? I mean, there's different ways of understanding the engagement where horizontal office suites, they don't give you any of that insight. And so when you talk about digital selling, the manager's saying, hey, what's going on with that prospect? The rep can say, well, wait a minute, they never opened my email. I'm not calling them back. So that extra insight that some of these platforms provide give you the visibility so you can speed up that productivity. Or, for example, they're looking at the proposal right now. They're studying the page with the pricing, and they basically say, hey, they've looked at that page for 20 minutes. Oh, look, my phone's ringing. They're calling me about the proposal. Again, horizontal tools are never going to do that. That's why these work hubs for sales are specifically designed to give the insight, because obviously a lot of times people want to do their research or they may even actually be serious about that particular vendor, but they don't want the rep to know. But the rep can figure out through some of the advanced analytics, hey, they actually are interested in me. Maybe I'll give them a call right now since it looks like they're looking at my information.
Well, and give me the baseline or help me sort out the problem, because I understand the problem statement you're making, which is, do your reps have the insight to understand what they should do? And lots of people talk about things like next best action. The problem, unless you're really deep in this, you're just trying to make your revenue number, guide your team, hire the people, and talk to customers, is there are about 8,000 different solutions that all claim that they have some magic AI that's going to automatically fix all this stuff. How do you parse that?
Look, there's a lot of things when it comes to selling and how you sell and what the process of selling is. And one of the things I've always said for a lot of years is a lot of salespeople are unconsciously competent. They know what to do to get a deal, but they can't tell you what they do because they've done it so many times. It's just kind of rote memory, but they cannot enunciate that. A lot of sales managers know that they can go in and jump in on a deal and help the rep close the deal and muscle it, but then they don't know all the things that are involved with that either. And so you get into, sales process and sales approaches and things like sales methodology. And this is really one of the things where it really falls off the cliff for the chief revenue officer. You ask the chief revenue officer what methodology you're using, what approach you're using for what we call guided selling. A lot of times they don't. If they're really good and they're growing, they know it. But a lot of times the executives, maybe the CRO knows, but a lot of the other executives that are in the C-suite have no idea what you're talking about. And that's bad. That's really a recipe for some of those people that don't know what a methodology is, probably aren't the people that are going to be on the short list to be the next CEO. So that's why I think when you look at it, one of the things that we see the most, now again, CRM's table stakes, but you start getting into further dialogue of, and again, some people have multiple methodologies. And, I just did a recent webinar where we talked about 5 things you need to do, and having a crisp methodology that you deploy and live by is critical. And again, most people, when you talk about sales AI, they think that's a panacea, where first of all, you have to have a methodology and you have to train your people on that methodology. Because today, and again, you're in this business, Patrick, a lot of people don't have anything when it comes to how the repeated approach to the steps of a sale, the steps to qualify, how do you close? And again, there's different skills you need, and there's different approaches to the different types of sales you're going to do. And this is getting into the science of that. But since everybody talks about, hey, we redid our development environment, the way we do engineering because we're cloud and we have to be faster, a lot of sales teams have not redone the way they sell, and they're winging it. Most sales organizations wing it, and they make their number by the hair of their chinny chin chin, but they don't know when they missed it, why they missed it. And, we didn't have enough prospects. But again, a lot of it comes down to the close ratio. The close ratio, the number of, they pitch 10 times, they close 5, that's 50% close ratio. That's not very good. But a lot of teams are doing even worse than that. So that means that if I increase my skills and do a better job with the way I sell, or the way my team sells, or whether my company sells, I have a higher close ratio. I can get more business with the same amount of work. And this is where a lot of executives miss out on that, and they also give lip service to it. Yeah, we've got a method. Well, what do you use? And then they can't tell you.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah, I violently agree. Let's take a brief break here to pay the bills, and I want to pick up this thread because you hit on several different things that I want to drill in on.
You're only as successful as your customers, and that demands the need for an exceptional sales execution, revenue retention, and customer success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams, however, is that their sales process just doesn't match how their customers buy. Sustained growth isn't possible because the revenue team isn't aligned with customers and prospects. With Altify's sales transformation solutions, companies can deliver predictable revenue growth. Yes, we said predictable revenue growth. They can also acquire and retain customers, and they can collaborate across the revenue team to qualify and win new business while delivering value that unlocks cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps salespeople, managers, and executives achieve sustained revenue growth. They help accelerate sales performance for Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Healthcare. They can do the same for you. Visit Altify.com, just like it sounds, Altify, Altify.com. All right, let's pick it back up with the second half of our discussion.
And welcome back to the podcast, everybody. We're getting into the depth of strategic selling with an industry expert, Jim Lundy, who's the CEO of Aragon Research. When we went to a commercial break, Jim was hitting on a couple different things, one of which is the delta between being the CRO versus the CEO is really a grasp on methodology. But maybe a little bit farther downstream, one of the things you were just talking about, Jim, that I want to come back to is, hey, if the team is winning 50% of the time or 40% or 30% of the time or worse in certain cases, a lot of times when it sounds like when you're sitting down with CROs or their teams, they can't clearly articulate why that is or the difference between good and not.
That's exactly right. They don't know why they're where they're at. It's kind of like not getting to the playoffs or get to the Super Bowl if you're only 500. You have to have a winning record, and with sales, it's the same sort of thing. So I think that's one of the things when you actually talk about this whole thing about having a methodology, sometimes we refer to it as guided selling, that will increase the win rate and get more of the middle performers and bottom performers performing at a higher level. I mean, your top performers are always going to win. But the problem for most sales organizations is they don't have enough of that because they're not training and investing. And to be honest with you, that's really the number one thing today is you need to train and invest in your sales teams, and you need to have an agreed to approach to how you're going to sell to buyers, and you have to practice what you preach and really do role plays and all the things that classic sales organizations. Again, I worked at Xerox. We were, that was the number one sales training organization in the world in their time. And that's why they did so well. Even with sometimes inferior products, they were able to outsell people by listening to customers and following a very rigorous methodology to the tune of even having to memorize scripts so that they, even if they messed up, that they knew what they were supposed to say and they could recall it and insert conversations at the right place at the right time. A lot of times today, again, we're back to the whole thing I started with. Sales teams are winging it. They're not using the disciplined approach. And it's just kind of like you're going into, again, when the Super Bowl's coming up, do you have plays that you run in sales? And a lot of times, like, well, we don't, we're not running the West Coast offense. In fact, I don't even know what offense we're running. And again, we run into that a lot more today than we used to. because companies are under pressure. The easiest thing that a CEO does, I just fired the head of sales because they weren't making it. But they never really got into why they weren't making it and why did they cut the training department 2 years before. So some of those lack of investments come back to pay when you look at, to your point about the close ratio. How many deals do I have to pitch before I get one deal?
100%. And well, you're also reclassing and significantly up-leveling the whole notion of sales enablement, because you're pointing it back at process and methodology and a strategic approach, coupled with, and maybe this is going back to your comment earlier about being a soccer coach, as well as the coaching element of this. Xerox was renowned as not just the methodology, they grew a whole class of strategic sellers. And what you're hitting on has little to do with tools and much more to do with discipline and process and the how of selling that actually informs what do you expect the team to do on the field day to day.
That's exactly right. And I think the big thing that sometimes people fall into the trap of with the digital tools is I think they think, well, I've got these new tools so I can just blast and pray and keep praying because I'm not willing to invest in the process, when the process is really what you really need to say, I've got an agreement that I'm going to send you that important presentation you asked, Mr. Customer, and then be able to do a trial close for the next step. The tool's not going to do that for you, and Sales AI is not going to do that. Sales AI may give you better data and better insight relative to whether they're qualified or not. But a lot of times today, we're still entering the early days of guided selling, and again, we're going to talk about that. But I think the idea of process is just like, again, when I coached soccer, it's very hard to teach a really good set play on a corner kick, right? Even for pro teams, how much do you have to practice that set play? Whereas American football, it's all set plays. Every play is scripted, right. Which is why, I saw Peyton Manning speak last week at a conference, and he was saying that, look, he goes, we spent very little time on the field, actually, but we spent all day in the film room going mentally over all the plays we needed to run, and then we went out and tried to run them physically. So I think that's really when you think, like, how much time does a sales team really spend practicing their plays? And again, you talk about a professional, like Super Bowl winning quarterback, and he's sitting there saying, look, he goes, it's all about practice and role play. And so we flip that over to sales and say, look, are you a world-class sales team? How much time are you practicing your plays? And today, a lot of teams are not practicing very much. They're winging it. And again, I'm going back, it's kind of old school. But the more you practice, the better you'll play, the higher your close ratio will be, assuming you know the right things to say at the right time in the sales cycle.
Yeah, well, and even if you don't, if you are actually running a set of plays, you can do a diagnostic on what happened and give you some data that's meaningful. And there's no amount of the whole notion of machine learning or AI assumes that you have the right data and you know what you're pointing at to begin with, and you're having the same sort of behaviors. And what you're saying is quite the opposite. All the AI in the world doesn't save you if you don't know what plays you're running on the field.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's the idea of having insight to understand, for example, is that the right target? Is there insight on this point of the sale? Other people would do this step. So I think that's the holy grail when we start talking about how we get to a more sophisticated approach. But I'm just saying is that instinctively, you can teach some of that so that they actually do know what they should be doing, or at least get them pretty far down the path, and then maybe down the road there's going to be assistants that will coach you. I think you're going to give us some insight in some of the things Altify is doing here. But I think that's really one of the big things is you still have to be consciously competent of what you're trying to do when you go on that initial call or the follow-up call or the close call. You still have to know, like, what am I going to do in this call?
Yep, 100%. So we're getting close to our time. Couple questions to wrap up with you. First, from the executive suite at Aragon, what are the 2 or 3 or 5 things that you're really focused on that's going to help from a research perspective that you're looking at this year and out into the future that really drives this ongoing sophistication and evolution around digital selling in the world we all live in?
We've talked about for 3 years, actually this will be the 4th year, we've talked about this idea of the holy grail as the outer wheel of one of our architectures for sales engagement, which is guided selling. We think that's really, when you start talking about this sales AI thing, if we can get to a point where the data can start to inform you like, hey, this might be the right, it's not just the right collateral, but this might be the right thing to suggest to a buyer. We think guided selling, and again, and coaching as well, which is, does the manager know when to step in and coach? Do they do a win-loss review? We think that we're starting to get to a point, and again, I know Altify is doing a lot in this area, where you do need to have and start thinking about methodology, and can you have a digital approach to that? Today, like I said, even getting to the point where first of all, does a firm have a methodology? So, that's a diagnostic, but we do think that guided selling is coming. There's very few people that are doing it, but we think that's going to be one of the things where if you can have that as part of your day-to-day process where the playbook is kind of digital and available and you can see it and understand it, then that starts to get more repeatability into the business. So that's one of the things we see. Obviously, we're going to be doing a lot in this area. We do cover AI outside of sales. So AI is a big topic, digital assistants, chatbots, things like that. But again, the world of shifting to this digital selling, that's one of the big things. And again, basic table stakes, like you got to have the full sales program. You got to do things like have a winner circle to motivate your team, all those things. I mean, we do a winner circle. We have a lot of fun when we do that. But we found a lot of organizations like, oh, yeah, we should do that, but we're not doing that. Like I said, I think the world is going to do digital, guided selling is going to become more real. And I think that's one of the big things we're looking for this year.
Fantastic. And to wrap up, Jim, give me your perspective as somebody who's been in this space for a while. Who's the best sales leader you've ever worked for, worked with, had as a client, or observed up close? And what did you learn from them that you pass on to everybody else?
I worked for some amazing leaders in my time at Xerox. One of them went on to run sales at Gardner, built that sales organization. His name is Follett Carter. There's a lot of other legends I've worked with, people like a guy on the West Coast named Jay Tyler, legend in his time. I mean, there's an awful lot of them. I always did pretty well myself, but like I said, there's a lot of great people out there that are really amazing, that have really probably done more than and haven't gotten enough credit for. You certainly see a lot of people out there that are I'm the expert in this. I mean, I've never made a claim to that, but I mean, those are two of the people I'd say, never got all the credit that they deserve. But I worked for many amazing leaders out there. We could go on for hours, I think, to talk about that. But I just mentioned that because, like, this guy Fall, he never got a lot of credit at Xerox. Jay did very well, number one district manager many times. So, I mean, he was kind of a legend. But I'd also point out that the CEO of SAP is a great sales leader. I worked with him at Xerox, Bill McDermott, amazing guy, and a lot of people don't know that he actually left Xerox before he was a VP, and then they realized, oh, wait, he quit, and they pulled him back in, promoted him, got him on a fast track. But Bill is a natural-born sales leader. He's even got a book where he talks about that. I know some of the people that he would go chase to get a promotion that's in his book, but Bill's probably the one that got the most credit for it because he's the CEO of SAP. But there's many others that did just as well but never got the credit.
Totally agree. And we should pick that up for a different time and talk about the legends of sales. Fantastic.
Sure.
And Jim, really appreciate your time today. We've been speaking about the digital world we live in, guided selling, and how to drive better sales outcomes with Jim Lundy from Aragon Research. So if you want more information or if you need some help in your organization trying to figure out how do you get the right kind of outcomes, you need to go to aragonresearch.com, or you can look up Jim online. And otherwise, we'll let you get back to moving the market, Jim. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, Patrick. Take care.
You've been listening to Predictable Revenue Radio with your host, Patrick Morrissey, Chief Marketing Officer at Altify, the sales transformation company. One of the many shows here on the ever-growing Funnel Radio channel for at-work listeners like you.